Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Thompson. I'm director of the Cooper-Hewitt National Design Museum, and it's a real pleasure to welcome so many of you here at this ungodly hour to discuss a very, very important theme, I think, in design and really in geopolitical and economic life generally. It's no surprise in many ways that we're holding this conference, this breakfast seminar. What I think is particularly interesting, though, is that it should coincide with Al Gore's nomination or award for Nobel Peace Prize for his work in terms of climatic change and man's involvement with that. This is actually our third public event in our National Design Week. Throughout this week, the museum is open, free admission to everybody who chooses to come here. We have events aimed at young people who are interested in a career in design. We have events aimed at educators, school teachers who wish to introduce design and design thinking into their curriculum. And we don't expect people to come just to Cooper-Hewitt. We are, as you can see, the cameras are rolling, and we are webcasting all of the events during National Design Week. So welcome to those of you who are watching on your screens in faraway places. I'm particularly pleased that this morning we're focusing on design in business, the business of design. And it's a real pleasure to have Sara Marie, who is, I think, one of the most thoughtful and interesting writers on design business from the Financial Times, moderating a panel with our very distinguished three speakers. I'm going to hand over to Sara and ask her to lead us through the morning. And, of course, at the end or during the course of in between presentations, please do feel free to pose questions from the audience. We're very, very keen to have your thoughts on the subject. So thank you all very much indeed. And finally, a very big thanks to Target Corporation, who are the sponsors of National Design Week and the National Design Awards. National Design Awards, of course, will be having the gala in the tent tomorrow evening, which is very exciting. We'll be unveiling the People's Design Award, and all of these activities really could not have taken place without the generosity of Target. So thank Target very much. And now I'd like to introduce Sara Marie from the Financial Times.
Thank you very much, Paul, and hello and welcome. I'm Sara Marie from the Financial Times. I cover sustainability and business, so it's great to be here to be able to talk about that and to talk to our panelists about that topic. We're also in a great location for this kind of discussion because we're in a museum that looks at historic and contemporary design, but we're also in a building that was once designed as the home for an industrialist. So we've got business and design both together under the same roof, as it were. And we're adding a third element today, which is the environment and sustainability. And I think, what's interesting about that is that, business has a key role to play here. This is something that I'm obviously aware of as a business reporter, but we're now with Al Gore has raised the awareness amongst consumers, and we're really trying to work out what we can all do to mitigate our impact on the environment. But I think without business, we can't really we can't go the whole way, because I'll give you one example. I mean, those television sets with the little standby lights. You want to try and turn those off to save electricity, but you find all your video settings will completely screw up afterwards. And so unless you can get companies who can think of ways of designing these products in different ways for consumers to be able to use them, it's going to be very, very difficult to change the world. Plus, of course, there is the huge impact that business has through its sheer scale. If large companies can design products that are sustainable and those are rolled out across mass markets, then we really have a chance of making a difference. When we think about design, traditionally we've thought about, from a pure design perspective, we think about aesthetics and form and function. From a business design, industrial design perspective, we're adding things like performance, whether this meets customer expectations, cost of manufacture, the bottom line. We've now got a third element added into all of this, which is sustainability and the environment. What do we now need to think of so that, and redesign products in such a way that perhaps the way they're manufactured is going to have less impact on the environment, the use during their life is going to have less impact on the environment, and the materials are not toxic. There's a whole range of things which I'm hoping we'll be able to discuss with the panelists here today. So we've got three great companies here represented, very different companies, and I'll just introduce them very briefly. We have John Righini here from GE Corporate. He's spearheading the Eco-Imagination initiative that GE launched a couple of years ago, which has really been seen as one of the boldest moves by a large company to embrace sustainability and design products that not only meet customer needs but also address quite tricky environmental issues. John formerly worked with Subaru of America and PPG Industries, a supplier of paints and coatings and fiberglass. We have Sven Shiers here, who is the sales and account manager for Patagonia, the outdoor wear manufacturer. Sven is well versed in a lot of these matters because he actually focuses on educating the sales outlets as well as developing markets. He's actually talking constantly to the salespeople and getting feedback on the different design elements that are working and that aren't working and what meets the consumer needs. Then finally we have James Ludwig of Steelcase, which is a cutting-edge furniture manufacturer. Some of you might know its products, the Leap and Think high-performance seating options, and sustainability is very much part of the way Steelcase operates its business. Before joining Steelcase, James was founding partner of Bold Architects Designers in Berlin, and he also was teaching at the University of Art at Berlin. So we've got a great panel. We've got three very different companies, and I hope we're going to be able to address all sorts of issues around business and sustainability and design. So perhaps everybody would like to come up and sit down. So I thought I'd start off with perhaps getting the three panelists here to talk a bit about what sustainability means for their particular companies. That will give them a way of actually introducing their companies and what they do, but with specific reference to environmental sustainability and how that is impacting the way they are addressing the design of their products. So, James, perhaps you'd like to start.
The unlucky number one. I work for Steelcase. I'm head of design for Steelcase. We're a global work effectiveness company. We make furniture for work environments. We're not nearly as cool as Patagonia or not nearly as large as GE. Nevertheless, we're a company of about 13,000 people. We're headquartered in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We have manufacturing sites in 28 different places around the world, a dealer network of about 800. Steelcase was founded in 1912. It was a metal office furniture company, and ultimately what gave us our big change was dealing with that environmental hazard of the day, fires, and we created a metal trash can. And so in 1954, when we became Steelcase, over the years acquired or built 11 different companies. So Steelcase, as you know, it is 11 companies, some small, some large, and generally we deal with work, whether it's in healthcare, office, education. That's where we see our expertise. And if you look at Steelcase over the years, over 100 years ago, we made the promise to be stewards of the environment. And obviously, our knowledge and awareness and research has changed what that definition is, and has also changed the company. We've declared ourselves to be PVC-free by 2012. All of our paint and metal finishes are 100% VOC-free. All our wood finishing is water-based. Since 1990, we have decreased hazardous waste by 99% in the company. So our commitment to the environment is not only based around our own set of values, but it's really about good business. If you look at the research today in the world, recently it's come out that over 2 million people a year die of complications due to poor indoor air quality. Couple that with the research that also has come out that says Americans spend 90% of their time indoors. You have to see that people who play in this field have an extreme responsibility to not only clean up our act, but help raise environmental and social consciousness around these issues. So as a company and as head of design, I feel extremely proud of our accomplishments. For instance, if you know McDonough's Cradle-to-Cradle certification, we have 21, soon to be 35 Cradle-to-Cradle certified products, which is the most in any industry in the world. So we made a determination to be leaders not only in our industry, but be considered among environmental leaders in the entire world. And so from that instance, I feel very, very honored to be invited to the panel and hope that we can contribute to everyone else's awareness and to help show you what Steelcase is committed to do for the environment. So.
Thank you. And John?
Hi, I'm John Righini. I'm Director Eco-Imagination at GE Corporate. For those of you who aren't so familiar with GE, we're a large multinational with 6 macro business units, industrial products like energy, turbines, aircraft engines, locomotives, infrastructure products, industrial products like the electrical components that you're very familiar with, light bulbs, appliances, power distribution equipment. In addition, a healthcare business, a small network, NBC, down the road here, and also consumer and commercial financial services. We have a long history as a company of really bringing what we call EHS, or environmental health and safety practices, to the forefront, and we've built up that ability to first looking at it as from a compliance standpoint, but then as bringing sort of a standardized best level of practice across the globe, regardless of the 100 countries that we have operations in. What Eco-Imagination brings slightly differently is, instead of looking at internal operations, we decided to commercialize an effort towards bringing customers the most progressive technologies and services that brought both environmental benefit and simultaneously operating benefit. So things that they could actually use day to day and would provide them with a proper hurdle rates, returns on investments that they look at in a day-to-day basis regardless of the technology. As part of this initiative, we have 4 basic goals. One is to provide share owner value, and that is really in the form of a metric around revenues. Our intention is to have $20 billion in revenues for the company derived from these products and services in the Eco-Imagination portfolio by the year 2010. We launched the initiative in 2005. The second is to provide the funding to get those types of products and services into market. So our goal around that is to spend $1.5 billion annually on research and development and design of the types of products and services that provide both the environmental and operating benefit. The third is really to walk the talk, and it's a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions corporate-wide in absolute terms by the year 2012 on a 2004 baseline. And then lastly, on the commitments for us, it's really to engage in forums like this and report out publicly on how we're doing, so that people are aware of the progress we're making on the first 3 commitments and getting feedback on what we can do better going forward.
Great, thank you. And Sven?
Hello, I'm Sven Shiers. I work with Patagonia. Thanks for saying the cool company. Hopefully we're a profitable company too, because at the end of the day, despite our long-standing commitment to environmentalism and sustainability, nobody cares if you don't make money. And we were started in 1973 by a man named Yvon Chouinard, and still privately held by him. We have about 1,000 employees overall worldwide, and we have involved in all aspects of basically marketing and design apparel, our core market, outdoor and ski, but also lifestyle, kind of stuff that people would wear every day, hopefully. our mission statement is a little bit different. I think it really defines the company, and kind of the three-pronged points of build the best product, do the least amount of harm, and hopefully use our business to inspire others to look for solutions to the environmental crisis. And since 1973, we've been involved in that. And our goal as a company, longstanding here, is to be 100% what we call sustainable, and we'll probably talk about what that means today, but to be completely recycled, recyclable, and sustainable by 2010. And we feel pretty good about that. We're about 70% there right now, current season, and that's increasing every year. We're a company that introduced recycled polyester basically to the apparel market. We've also used exclusively organic cotton in our manufacturing since 1996. And this came about as an internal study that was done by the company. We talk about leading an examined life. And we did a study to see what was the most environmentally impactful thing we did as a company, and everybody assumed that it was going to be the use of nylon and polyesters, and that they're petroleum-based, and everything from it being extracted to the ground and the amount of energy that it takes to refine it. So we were pretty shocked when it came back that it was cotton, conventionally grown cotton, was the most damaging thing. And you go, cotton? How can that be? You know, the fabric of your life, green, beautiful. And then you examine it and you find out that conventionally grown cotton is such a tiny part of the gross agricultural production, yet it uses somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 20% of the herbicides and over 25% of the pesticides in the world. And we're like, what do we do? We've identified the problem. What's the solution? Well, switch to organic cotton seems quite simple, right? Well, the problem in the early 90s when this was identified was there was basically almost no organic cotton in the market. And when you found it, then it was basically crunchy. It wasn't fine. You couldn't make nice stuff with it. And so rather than give up on the project, we said, let's do it. And in 1996, we said from there on, we will use exclusively organic cotton. And now you can see in the marketplace, the finest garments you can get are available in organic cotton, not just crunchy wool twiggy sweaters. Thanks.
Well, that's very interesting, because actually what I was going to move on to was to talk about the various different aspects of what we mean by sustainable design and what trade-offs those involve, and Sven has just given us some really interesting examples of those. But perhaps, I'll go through the three of you one by one and say, what for your particular company are the priorities in terms of sustainability? Is it recycling and use of recycled materials? Is the carbon emissions the thing to focus on? What are the different things we mean when we talk about sustainable design? And James, perhaps you'd like to start.
Yeah.
Yes. Rachel, you're next to me, so.
Okay. I see the way this is going. So for us, we saw it as a real foundational change. And so we kind of created a equation for the company. And so you'll hear various people walking around, whether it's in the development center or our global headquarters, saying MC plus LCA plus R squared. And they just say it, kind of over and over again. And in a way, it just became a way to simplify a mindset shift for the company. And that is materials chemistry, plus life cycle assessment, plus recycle and reuse. And so we develop programs around all of those. And if people are aware of materials chemistry, it's really understanding the products that you make at a molecular level. And the way we've chosen to do that is partner with MBDC, Bill McDonough, and Michael Braungart, Design Chemistry, to use a material selector. So anytime my team comes up and proposes something terrific, whether it's some resin impregnated something or something they've invented, we really sort of hold that up against a material selector to say what's in it. And it's not only what's in it as the product itself, but what was the supply chain that got it there? What was the monomer that created the polymer, and what is the occupational hazard to the people making it, et cetera, to create a red, yellow, and green scenario. And obviously the goal is to be all greens, but in today's world, as we are developing and as big companies are developing more green options, you definitely try to eliminate reds. That's the first thing you try to do. And so hence the elimination of PVC by 2012, and PVC won't exist in any of the new products my team's developing. LCA gets at the things you were talking about with carbon footprint and emissions. It deals with materials, production, transport, use, and end of use. So your great article about take-back programs recently is something that in our industry we pioneered with the Think Chair and other products. In fact, our take-back program is often dealing with competitive product where those companies don't have take-back programs, because we just see that as also a way of harvesting resources. And then recycle, reuse. Those are the things we've learned from, or my 8-year-old's learning in school, and comes back and makes sure that I'm putting things in the proper bins. But that's great. I think that as our generation starts to create a new mindset shift, to see a generation underneath us, it will be as sort of second nature to them as say using the web is to another generation. That we won't run into people that are like, what's LCA? Like, you don't run into people that are like, what's the internet anymore? So it'll just become second nature.
Yeah. Now, John, I mean, you're working for a company that makes everything from light bulbs to aeroplane engines. Given such a huge, broad spectrum of products, what are the kinds of areas that need to be focused on, or is it the whole gamut?
For us, the singular focus is really the primary. I shouldn't say the singular. The primary focus is on greenhouse gas emissions reduction and technologies that enable that. So if it's the most fuel-efficient aircraft engine in the world, or renewable energy power generation like our wind turbines business and our solar business and our Jenbacher reciprocating gas engines business, which basically burns bio.
Repeat that?
Yes, 3 times fast.
The next generation will know what that means.
Yeah, but those engines burn landfill gas, biogas, all the gamut of renewable technologies to high efficiency compact fluorescent lamps that you would put in a socket in your own home. All of those are either eliminating the use of fossil fuels or taking fossil fuel use and improving the efficiency of the fuel burn, essentially. Whether it's in downstream in the utility company's power plant, or on your physical jet aircraft as you're flying around, and improving your fuel burn by 15% with our new GNX engine. So beyond that, so it's really around resource usage there. Beyond that, we look at water. We have a large water business. Everything from cleaning water that comes out of factories and or closed loop systems, desalination for large regions. You think of Asia, China, emerging markets where they have serious issues around the water quality and getting the water to their citizens. So the macro perspective is really any sort of resource use, and then the subsets, I would say, are energy efficiency, primarily connecting to greenhouse gas emissions, and then also water resource use.
Right. Yeah. Now, Sven, for your company, to what extent is carbon emissions the focus, or are there other considerations? Recyclability, I would imagine, is a big one for you.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I think when we look at it, we're trying to look at it from all aspects of it, and that the carbon emissions right now seems to be the trendy place to focus. And I think a lot of it, when you take a step back and again look at the big picture, sometimes that can blind you a little bit to some of the less obvious places. What we're finding now, as we really start to really get into our supply chain and look at textile manufacturing, what we're finding is, as much as that contributes, transportation costs for us and what that means. And then you say transportation costs, we're finding that it may actually be better to ship something 16,000 miles by ship than it is to drive something 3,000 miles across the country by truck. Right. And as you really get into it, there's just, I don't think it's, we don't look at one thing. And if you do, I think you tend to block off yourself from places where you may be able to find, better advantages or better alternatives within that. The recyclability for us is certainly huge. Such a big part of our business is based in nylons and polyesters. This fall, we actually introduced an initiative where we're not only taking back our old fleece garments, we're actually able to take back any of Malden Mills Polartec. So we'll take back any companies, don't care who made it, where it was made, and sort of to James' point here, that it's it's new resources for us. And I had the TV on this morning, and oil's at just under $90 a barrel, and chances are that's not going to go down a whole lot. So in the long range, thinking that these products that we're taking back, these raw materials that we're acquiring now, at some point is actually going to be more profitable than using a virgin polyester would be.
Right, right. Which I think is a very interesting point, because I think with all of this area, you're looking at quite tricky trade-offs a lot of the time. I mean, I've been speaking to people who are saying, well, actually, we're focusing so much on the carbon footprint these days, but actually, water use is going to be a huge problem running down the line. So, when it comes to designing products, what are some of the sort of trickier trade-offs, and how do you accommodate those within what you need to do, which is provide performance, good design, and something the customer is actually going to want? I mean, I'll open that to anybody who wants to comment.
Well, I would throw out, for us, we get a lot of questions about polyester versus organic cotton or hemp or other natural fibers. And we just don't think it's an either-or proposition, that until and unless synthetic fibers can achieve the level of comfort and performance that natural fibers have, certain fabrics by design are going to have better applications for different activities. And so, to your point about the consumer actually has to want it. And that is kind of it from a design standpoint. It has to look good, it has to fit right, but it also has to feel good. And because of the different performances of the fibers, at this point, who knows down the road, but at this point, it's not an either-or proposition for us.
I think for me as a designer, we're starting to formulate. I think there's more opportunities now with material chemistry than ever before, and that's exciting as a designer. So rather than say in our products where it might have been develop the machine and then make the machine pretty, or develop the machine and then skin it somehow, it's actually I'm sort of formulating this view in our company that it should be about this fusion where material performance and the shape of things, where structure and performance, they come together in a different way. So that's not necessarily been the way our industry's gone. And so rather than seeing it as a limiting factor, we're seeing it as an opportunity. It actually was a mental shift that was, maybe it was opportunistic to change the design philosophy, but at the same time, when you're forced to look at the chemical makeup of things, it doesn't become a constraint anything less than, say, cost or time or all the other things that have driven designers crazy for decades. And so that's one. The other is, I've always felt in the beginning that sort of to be green didn't mean it had to look like hemp or burlap. Right. To your point, and that so if you're familiar with our company called Design Tex, we created a product called Climate Tex Life Cycle, which is actually, to your point about water coming out of a plant, that the water coming out of the process at the end was actually cleaner than the water going in, and that the scraps of the fabric at the end were actually used to compost strawberry fields. And in the end, it was one of the one of the sexiest products that Design Tex had produced in terms of desirable. So for Steelcase, we say the product to be a Steelcase product has to be smart, desirable, and viable. And if it misses on any one of those, it can't be a Steelcase product. And smart, it really has to be part of that materials level. Right. So I don't see it as much a constraint as one might imagine.
Right, right. That's interesting. That brings up the whole area of green chemistry. I assume is what you're talking about. To what extent is the development of these new materials going to actually revolutionize design? Should we be actually looking further back in the design process, as it were, rather than trying to sort of retrofit our existing designs and actually looking, well, what is this made up of? Can we actually go, should we be looking at science rather than design? Yes,
okay, toss it back to me. Well, I think to continue on is we have a certain responsibility to go back and say the things that we designed decades ago or even years ago are still being made. Yeah. And so we need to take the bad out. There's no question. But in terms of looking forward, I think, again, the opportunities with materials chemistry outside of just the sustainability factor is changing the landscape of design. We can do things with materials and plastics and nanotechnology that we couldn't do before. We just can't make the same mistakes as previous generations by, putting brominate fire retardants and, and certain coatings that end up in polar bear fat or, mother's breast milk. We just can't make those same mistakes. we'll always look back and say, how could they have made that decision? My thing was, how could could they use lead pipes for water and the whole empire collapsed? You wonder if we're making some of those same mistakes.
Right.
But I think as education and awareness rise, not only will there be corporate leadership that are driving change, but consumers, when they're seeing lead paint in their children's toys and kerosene and plastic eyeballs coming out of whatever market they're being made, they're going to demand different things, and that'll drive innovation.
Right,
I think it always has.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one thing I'd like to move on to is the role of the consumer in all of this. We've got, I suppose, consumers are perhaps more aware of Sven and James's companies, but perhaps with GE, we're buying light bulbs, and we're not we're not green consumers in that respect. To what extent is green design being driven by consumers, and to what extent really is it coming from the corporate side, or is it a mixture of both? And perhaps, John, you'd like to answer that.
I mean, as you pointed out, we've got a lot of consumer-facing businesses, whether they're NBC Universal or our lighting businesses or our appliance businesses, but the majority of our company is actually focused on business-to-business endeavors, like selling a wind turbine to a utility, or selling, when we had our plastics business, plastics to Steelcase. So what we try to do is, in those business-to-business relationships, is provide that no-compromise solution. So in any Eco-Imagination product or service, it has to hit the customer's operating performance positively and their environmental performance positively, because to a degree, you'll pay a margin for improved environmental performance, but any CFO will come down the hall and start knocking on your door if you're not also providing some sort of value add going down the line. So what we try to do, for the most part, in business to business, and I would say we approach the same on our consumer-facing businesses, like our appliance business and our lighting business, is make it a no-brainer to go down the road. So if you look at a CFL, and there might be a higher upfront cost for a CFL, but you're getting the payback period, you're getting the money back in energy savings. Right. Educating the consumer on that, just as we would sit down in a boardroom and talk to a utility CEO about buying 100 wind turbines, we have to walk them through the economics in either case. The consumer obviously is impacted by not just economic decisions; they're obviously impacted by emotional decisions, as James and Sven can probably speak to much more than I can. But I still think that there's this opportunity for education, and that you're getting a more and more astute consumer. And the research that we've seen says that they are now looking for means to take action in their own personal lives more and more, as opposed to, say, even 5 years ago. So providing those opportunities, the companies that provide those opportunities to take action but also make economic sense are going to be the winners going forward.
Right, right. Well, Sven, I mean, you're engaged in a lot of education and reaching out to new markets. I mean, you will have your consumers who buy Patagonia because they have a certain ethical belief. To what extent are you actually trying to reach out to consumers with designs that perhaps people that might not care about the environment but would buy them simply because they're a good design and a good product?
Well, and at this point, that's crucial for us, because the number of consumers who will make that buying decision based strictly on the environmental aspects of a product is relatively small. We really feel and we hope that this whole movement of green sustainability is really kind of make the analogy of where tech was 20 years ago. To James' point, what's the internet? What's green? What's sustainable? People are now asking those questions where they didn't even as little as 5 or 10 years ago, for sure. And that is, it's key to our success is because of that. The product has to, again, fall back on look good, fit right, last, be durable. Because more people are going to make a decision and then go, oh, and it's made out of organic cotton? Well, what is organic cotton? And then hopefully send them down that road. And from an education standpoint, it's kind of, I think the more you know, the more likely you are to take a step back and examine your life and look at where you can make change. Nobody is nobody's going to go back to living in caves and wearing loincloths at this point, but it's relatively easy with the information that's available out there now to look at what you're doing in your own life and make little changes that can actually have a big impact down the road.
Can I just add that 85% of RFPs that come into Steelcase now contain an environmental component, which is radically different than it was a few years ago. At the same time, the Bruce Sterling wrote, I think, in the most recent great issue of Metropolis, was that he said, the old model was that there were these big, greedy, evil corporations that were just trying to, rape the landscape and create profit, and that it was a good, organization or activists that would actually create environmental change. I think if you're passionate about the issue and dispassionate about the facts and look at them, businesses now realize that it's the price of entry and it's profitable. And so while there is a groundswell of, I'll call it consumer emotion, there is also a tremendous movement among corporations to say, this is good business, we have to do this. And it just makes sense.
Yes, yeah. I mean, to what extent? I was talking to an architect the other day who said he loves nothing better than a really difficult site and a lot of very tricky local regulations and conservation rules. To what extent can we actually see sustainability and protection of the environment as a positive rather than a negative when it comes to design itself, and perhaps looking even more visually at this, perhaps I'm thinking of some of the Steelcase products where the need to recycle actually was what prompted the actual look of the chair. To what extent do we see this as a positive rather than a constraint? And Sven, perhaps you'd like to start.
Well, I think when you, again, when we look at, from our standpoint, the design of something and kind of going to something like organic cotton, and this was a real opportunity for us because at the time when we did the study and found out about conventionally grown cotton, in the conventional cotton market, we couldn't dictate size of yarns and quality of yarns because we're such a small consumer of the product. But here, when we went and looked at organic cotton, because it was a relatively small, relatively few number of mills that could work with the product, we could actually say, this is our spec. And then they designed, we were able then to design around the organic cotton, and it was a huge positive for us, where in the past we couldn't get the quality or really dictate to the market, and now we could. So it was great.
Yeah.
And for us, I mean, I'm going to use the terms design and product development interchangeably because we do not make the chair, we make the stuff that goes into it. And we don't design the airplane, we design the aircraft engine to meet the mission or the need. But what we view is it's a huge competitive advantage. If we can hit those metrics of delivering on environmental performance and operating performance, we create a strong product that's protected by intellectual property. I mean, you think about an aircraft engine, thousands of moving parts with a lot of high technology in either the fan blade design and the materials used in that. It locks things up for us. So if for those who don't deliver on those metrics, I just don't. With us and our focus on greenhouse gas emissions, direct correlation with fuel consumption. So it's always a connectivity there. If you're achieving the CO2 reduction, you're also achieving fuel burn reduction, and so it wins in the financial chief financial officer's room as well, and again, more competitive advantage for the company. So I see a time in the future where, to this point about the internet and knowing life cycle analysis and using that, just throwing it out there all the time, there'll be a time where there isn't a special eco-imagination portfolio. It will be everything we do, especially in our infrastructure businesses and our industrial businesses.
Right.
We won't be able to compete without doing those, without hitting those metrics.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, obviously the oil price is a huge factor in all of this. To what extent, if and who knows whether this will ever happen, if the price of oil comes down dramatically, does that change the perspective?
For a lot of our customers, whether it's oil or other fossil fuels, it's a huge portion of their energy consumption, or energy. It's a means for their energy. So you're not talking about somebody filling up the pump and saying, oh, it's $30 one day and $40 another. It's millions, if not billions of dollars a year for these people, so for these companies. So it's always going to be a key area that they're going to look at. Beyond that, I think, and directly connected to that, is the monetization of carbon. So whether fuel prices come down, which we see no indication that they will, or dramatically come down, or it's a carbon-constrained world where we now have a cap-and-trade system globally, there will be, or it's just the simple idea that, hey, I've got this bill for $1 billion for fuel. I got to do something about it. Even if I can take $10 million out, that's $10 million that I can do. I can put towards better customer service. I can put towards a better designed product. It's not going away. It's hardly a trend or a fad.
Right, right. Now, James, I wonder if you could get really specific about perhaps one of your products and give us an example of how having to think about the environmental considerations actually led to perhaps a design innovation that might not have materialized otherwise.
I think the one that's been documented, actually, and one people might be familiar with is the Think Chair, which is a few years old now, 2-3 years old. And the notion was explicit in the beginning of that project that it would be disassemblable within 5 minutes. Because the research, we basically have started a big research project, and then we end up, product development falls on top of that. And we found that while many companies and even ourselves, we were able to say, oh, it has 98% recycled content or 99% recycled content, whether it's pre-consumer or post-consumer, it's irrelevant when at the end of the day it's just too damn hard to take apart and you just put it on the street and hope somebody either uses it or throws it away. So that we ultimately said it's got to be one of the criteria. So that was one. The other is material use, and so we explicitly said we wanted to create a chair that was very lightweight, physically and visually. And so, but we wouldn't sacrifice in the ergonomic performance that we'd become known for in leading the industry, et cetera, et cetera. So when we went to Glenn Oliver Lowe to partner with us on the development of that chair, we picked him specifically because of a shared set of values. How many people are designers and architects in the audience by some chance? I think these people would agree that designers in general and architects are do-gooders by nature, and that they sort of do that, not by any other thing, that they really want to change the world in some small ways and some big ones. And so the Think Chair for us was a real stake in the ground at the time. And sort of by having that fulcrum for us, in the end, we've been able to not only internally but externally garner resources, enthusiasm, money, support, et cetera, to do more projects like that.
So, I mean, would you agree that actually this sustainability is a sort of a catalyst for innovation?
Absolutely, without question.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it is a whole new way of looking at business. You look at our energy business. We've been making turbines for years. And power production equipment for years. In 2002, we got into the wind business by picking up a company from Enron, a wind business from Enron. We paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $250 to $300 million for the company. In 5 years' time, we're set to do $4.2 billion in revenues. So it is. I mean, it is not like we're dabbling in these things. We are seriously in them, and they are shifting the nature of 100-year-old GE businesses for us. And with our founding product of the light bulb, I mean, moving from a 135-year-old technology to compact fluorescence, then to light-emitting diodes. I mean, we've shifted, made major purchases and investments around light-emitting diodes. We now have we upped our ante in our LED business, and we're looking at the next generation of organic light-emitting diodes. So literally wallpaper of light, and just with energy consumption reduction in 80 to 75 to 80% over already CFLs. So you're talking massive swings in and game changers. So for us, it's the businesses we're investing in, it's the products we're bringing to market, and then it's the R&D investments we're making across the board.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, that is cool and big.
Yes.
And Sven.
Well, I think I was just thinking which one I was going to pull up, and I think for me as a user of product, it would be our Capline, our polyester base layer. So fabrics that are designed to wick moisture off of your skin and provide warmth when it's cold, keep you cool when it's warm. Anybody who's engaged in these activities know that polyester worn next to your skin for any amount of time develops its own special aroma that really you can't get out of the fabric. Once it's there, it's pretty much there. And since this has been a core business for us since the beginning, we introduced polypropylene as a base layer back in 1976. And having spent much time in tents and around other people wearing polyester base layer for extended period of time. So for us, it's always been this, how can we get rid of the odor? Is there something that can be done? It's been a project been going on for years. And we went down a fabric development road with one of our fabric suppliers that they developed a process where they used a silver ion treatment, which effectively eliminated the bacteria growth, which is what causes the odor. And we went down that road for probably 3 years and got to the point where it's just like, as we started examining it and said, we can't do this. It works. The technology works, but from an environmental standpoint, we can't get behind, the silver ion from the mining standpoint. What happens at the end life when a product that's got a heavy metal, putting it into a landfill? And somebody else's point here about, well, we don't really know what wearing a heavy metal next to your skin might do in 20 years. Mm-hmm. So we walked away from that product, and that company then sold it to other vendors who have brought that product to market. For us, 3 years later, we brought to the market what we call Gladiator, which I still have a hard time saying without smiling. But it's a completely organic, natural product that does exactly the same thing. Actually, our long-term testing shows that it actually lasts longer, works better than the silver ion treatment, and it's actually the byproduct of another industry. So for us, it was like that's kind of a perfect culmination of design, and that the sustainability drove the innovation.
Right. Now, no company works in isolation, and increasingly supply chains are very global and very complex. I suppose both at the front end of the product, but also with recycling. It's no good designing a product that's recyclable if there's nobody to collect it. So, to what extent is that a challenge for you guys? And is that becoming easier? Are suppliers and collection systems, is that something when we're thinking about designing products that we need to actually bring in as a big consideration? And any of you feel free to answer that.
Well, I'll chime in there since it's been something we've been doing for a number of years. And we have drop-off points in all of our stores. We actually encourage people not to make a special trip if they are going to bring it in. Just do it as part of your general, put it in the corner till you're coming to the store anyway or going by.
Right.
Again, this is another place when we look at stuff, is it more efficient to actually ship it back? So what we're trying to do is encourage people to kind of group it all together, even within our wholesale dealers, and they get a big box of it together. Then we send it back to our distribution center in Reno, and the stuff is then sent back to actually Japan, where the actual recycling process takes place. I've gotten lots of questions about shipping something back to Japan, again, from an emission standpoint. And what we found is that those containers were going back to Japan empty anyway. The weight of the fleece negligible in terms of the amount of fuel burned. And the recycling process itself is pretty much completely almost mechanical. So we find it's more than 70% efficient to recycle polyester at this point than use virgin polyester.
Mm-hmm.
I think chasing supply chains is a really big issue. The headlines every day talk about somebody whose supply chain got a little bit out of control. And no one's really immune from those risks, especially as we had a captive supply chain for decades, and as we develop our global supply chain, it's not only economic pressures or liability pressures, but also it's values pressures that basically say you have to look at your suppliers and your suppliers and your suppliers' suppliers. Mm-hmm. And those things take time, and it adds costs, but it's worth it because no one wants to end up as a headline. But I think if you believe in this, it's just something you do. The difficulty I think for us as we develop these cradle-to-cradle products and have the most in the industry, when a customer that we might have migrated from a competitor comes back and says, "But can you take those?" Harvest those panels or those chairs or this. We don't know what's in that stuff. Right. If it's our own stuff, we know what's in there. And to your point about, without a doubt, it makes sense to, to embrace this in a broader scale. But it creates pressures against the values and the economics. In any case, it's a good thing to do. And more we're doing that. But the supply chain thing is going to continue to be something that big companies especially wrestle with. The smaller companies where you really develop personal relationships with suppliers and can really maintain consistency, but oftentimes you're dealing with supply chains that shift around and material suppliers
and have their own suppliers.
Yeah, you go to this, you follow the supply chain back and you find out there's sort of like 8 big plastic suppliers, right? And so you go straight to them and talk to them, and then you understand you have a more clear chain of chain of command and also supply. The life cycle assessment really encompasses that whole thing in a very scientific way. So not only is it good business, but it's a good insurance policy to follow LCA.
But incredibly complex, I imagine, because you're having to go so far back deeply into your supply chain. It must be sort of rather like being an investigative journalist and tracking it down.
That's when I'm glad I'm in design and leave it to those smart guys who travel all over the world and chase those things down. But we have a very, very talented group who does that, and it's interesting. Speaking of design thinking really finds its way into all other areas of business. The people who are in our global supply chain group are now people who have been trained in research techniques and design thinking to find out how to creatively problem solve with the suppliers themselves. So.
Now,
for GE, a huge company where you're supplying people and
yes, I was going to say for us, we're doing it indirectly, and because. No surprise, many of our customers, we're also their customers, so there's a buy-sell relationship with almost everybody that we work with. And in those instances, and it sort of gets back to the key goal of the growth strategy of increasing revenues. We will go back to our suppliers and help them with their own efficiency in their facilities through anything from relamping projects to their potentially on-site power generation if they've got that, to the whole spectrum. We've got a team in our consumer and industrial businesses that will audit a facility, and whether it's a large plant or whether it's a commercial office building, and help you figure out how to get efficiencies. And oh, by the way, here's a suite of GE products and services that help you do that. I mean, very self-serving, and I think our share owners are happy about that. I think that things that like when we talk about the spectrum of businesses, I would almost look at it at two degrees. There's the smaller business that has that direct relationship and can work with that supplier to source exactly X, Y, and Z materials, and then on the other end of the spectrum, perhaps with the greatest amount of power, or the two the ends of the spectrum that have the greatest amount of power is the small and the large. You look at what Walmart is doing, and they can sit down and say, this is what we want, and this is how we want it, and by the way, we want the China price. So because of their girth, and it is a market-changing dynamic for them to do that. The people in the middle are kind of the ones that get trapped because they don't have necessarily that direct connectivity, and they don't have the size to dictate terms. So, but I think you're going to see, as the two ends of the spectrum, there'll be convergence, and the companies in the middle will win because the larger companies are setting terms and pricing, and the smaller companies are setting terms and quality of product as well. So, I think it's the next logical evolution in a strategy like ours. Have we gone to the degree that a Walmart has? No, not yet. We're doing it again, sort of indirectly by encouraging purchase of our products.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now, perhaps to sort of move to a much more sort of design-specific question, thinking about designers of the future, what are people coming up through design school and university today going to have in the way of qualifications that are totally different from, I suppose, when you thought about going to design school, 10, 20 years ago, that companies like you will be looking for in designers that you're recruiting? James, perhaps you'd start there.
I think the effect that I've seen, especially I call them my 20-somethings. They call themselves the kids in my studio. It's their values and lifestyles and their desire for professional opportunity is so linked in a way that perhaps other generations might have said, "I'll sacrifice this to be able to get to there." It's an interesting kind of sort of ball of wax for them, and so in a way by their very presence, they're pushing a mindset shift in business and in design. So they're coming out with, I think, a great set of values. But the challenge to being, whether you call yourself a green designer or not, I think ultimately that won't be even a classification. You'll be a designer, because it is one of those constraints or opportunities that any design challenge presents, again, like cost and time and market opportunity. The challenge today for a designer is that knowledge and information is shifting so quickly. What we thought often was a great material even a few months ago, pops up red on our material selector because they found antimony in it. And so then we have a year to get it out of our products, even though we're pushing everything that way. And so it's an interesting thing. So in a way, you have to be autodidactic, and I think this process of continual self-learning is always going to be something that the designer will have to become more and more nimble at. So it's not just being up to date on the best CAD tool, right, or even on business issues. There's going to be one more factor that people have to continually challenge themselves to learn on, myself included.
Are designers going to have to take chemistry degrees?
That, or as our CEO says, your network should be the smartest thing in your environment, right? So you have to have the smartest people in the room. I've always said I don't need to have the best music collection. I just need to know the guy who does. Right. And so, in the same way, I think partnering with the most brilliant people in those fields are what one tries to do. The model of designer that Tim Brown of IDEO is fond of talking about, which I agree with, is these T-shaped people that really have a sort of breadth of character and interest and curiosity, but have deep expertise in one area. And so I believe that's the case. But it's that breadth that actually creates the connections between people with varying expertise and creates a broad network, so you know who to call. Right. So that's important, I think.
Yeah. John?
From our perspective, across the board, there's a huge shortage of intellectual capital in engineering and science. So does a designer need to have a chemistry degree? I don't know, but certainly the more familiar they can be with the sciences, the better for us. And that goes for all of our business leaders and employees. It's difficult to work at General Electric without some either interest or background or knowledge in engineering and sciences. I'm a liberal arts major, but I'm a car guy, and I like big equipment that goes fast. So, there's just intellectual curiosity that gets me into and understanding these realms. I don't have the depth of expertise that a chemistry major or an engineer would, but there needs, if it's something that you're not comfortable with, embrace it, because it will impact, if you're in a business-to-business industrial design world, it's going to impact how you get sales to your customer and succeed in that sense. And if you're in the ultimate end user market, it's going to be something that the consumer is going to be more and more aware of. So an understanding, a network, a curiosity, and an engagement in sciences is something I think you're going to need to win, at least in the short run, if not in the long run, in this space.
Yeah, yeah. Sven, when it comes to your designs, to what extent is technical knowledge becoming a prerequisite for designers?
Yeah, I think that it's really, they need to have a kind of a holistic look at it from all aspects. And I think it's better to be, from our designer standpoint, more of a jack of all trades, and that familiarity and understanding. And inherently as a company, I think our designers are probably drawn to us that way because of who we are to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. More so than having a focused knowledge in one area. And we have, an independent in-house fabric testing lab that all they do all day long is test fabrics. You test ours, test our competitors. And that information then can be relayed back through the designers, and then they're picking and choosing their materials based on that feedback. And I think when you, again, kind of taking people's core competencies, relying on the rest of your team and looking at it as a team approach as opposed to just being focused in one aspect is really the key to success.
Right, yeah. Well, I've got one more question, then I'm going to open it up to the audience, but this is perhaps more of a sort of almost philosophical question. What is the role of designers in actually even, rethinking, for not just redesigning the products themselves, but do we need to sort of rethink the way we live and even design ourselves out of it? I mean, obviously, we still need to have chairs to sit on, but are there ways that we should be thinking even further ahead than that as designers, and saying, well, maybe we don't need to do that we don't need to design that product anymore. We can turn it into a service. And I will. Anybody, the three of you, would like to answer?
I'll fire off. Just as an apparel company and fashion driving our business, sometimes whether we like it or not. And as a company, one of our philosophies has always been buy less but buy better. Mm-hmm. And from a product life cycle analysis, and that everything that we make has an unconditional customer satisfaction guarantee. And it's amazing to me what a relatively small amount of product we get back if it doesn't meet somebody's expectations. And then the stuff that does come back, that we get 20-year-old pairs of shorts where the zipper is, quite frankly, worn out. It's 20 years old. And the person get this great letter with it says, please, can you put a new zipper in these? If you can't, just send them back. I want them back. Don't throw them away. And that sort of passion, it's got oil on one side and fish blood on the other. And it's a story. It's that person has an experience with that. And, I think that it goes completely opposite of what's the new color, what's the new fashion. And from a design perspective, hopefully we're having that timeless, design that's something, somebody's going to pull out of their closet 6 or 8 or 10 years. And not only is it still, in style, but hopefully looks as good as it was the day you bought it. So it's just a very different perspective from the rest of our market, our industry, and just goes completely counter to, buy it, wear it 3 times, and throw it away for the new one.
Yeah.
I mean, for us, being both in the business and consumer spaces, it's an issue of changing behaviors and changing the mindset of the way that either our business customer or our consumer looks at how to use the product and how to evaluate the product. So. It can't. We've factored in new metrics for them to look at, whether it's the price of carbon or the disposal cost of a product, or the litany of issues. It's changing that behavior around how to use it, how to take it away. You think about recycling bins, and I don't know about other people's relationships with their in-laws, but I can't imagine my father-in-law having done that. And you talk about the next generation. It's second nature. It's automatic. It's not a consideration. I think you can build profit models for sustained growth, but there is a fundamental need to change certain behaviors or certain means of evaluation, whether they're in the boardroom or at the shelf as you're reaching for that product. And that happens over time. I think we've got the benefit of this connectivity in these viral communities that make it happen a lot faster than it used to. But fortunately, I think there are plenty of examples of how we've had the ability to adapt over time, and we just need to do it at a more rapid pace when you think about climate change, and then on general environmental terms, there's certainly opportunities as well. So.
On a personal note, it's funny you bring that up because so when I first started out, I was designing high-tech products, and after a couple of years, I sort of got frustrated with torturing plastic. And, I'd probably come across this Marcusean idea, I don't want to be a tool of capitalism. And so I went to architecture school here in New York City and found out that's kind of no different. But I think eventually, then I realized, I think, again, I go back to this notion that I believe that designers, have a social contract to make the world better. That's a firm belief I have, and I think a lot of people do who are in this field. And if you look at statistics today, buildings alone, it's 30% of global emissions are based on buildings. 30% of landfill globally is based on buildings. 65% of our electrical use consumption in the United States is buildings. So whether you can, I don't necessarily think it's talk people out of chairs, although that would shorten meetings quite a bit.
Right.
I think that, just doing them better. You talked about product endurance as one way, making them smarter, making them, sort of reconditionable. So take-back programs so that you can get them back into the market. Those things are they're just design criteria that I think that with a new enlightened design class will actually just start to become status quo. And through that way, again, in some small ways and some big ways, you can really, really affect change in the world and make it a better place than when you left, than when you came here.
Right, yeah. So I'd like to open it up to questions now, and I see one hand going up immediately.
Hello. I'm interested to know how, we've talked about the consumer and we've talked about the business angles driving patterns of design and production. How do you think government legislation is going to play a role when GE is building aircraft, building aircraft engines for clients who are going to be taxed with a carbon tax when they go into the EU? They're going to find themselves, you're going to find yourself unable to sell incandescent light bulbs in Australia.
Yeah.
Steelcase will find that its PVC can be, built out of products by 2012, but already PVC is banned in certain parts of the world. How do you feel that government legislation is going to change the way you design and the way you do business?
I'll field the general question on business. For us, we don't see government legislation getting any easier by any stretch of the imagination. So it's incumbent on our engineers and our designers to come up with technologies to address the issue. It's that simple, or we won't be in those businesses any longer if we can't perform. So. The piece of the dialogue that we've sort of changed the game in is we've gotten more involved in actually pushing for more stringent regulation. And that sounds sort of counterintuitive in the history of the big bad businesses, I guess, if you're to take that perspective. But what we've looked at is, for us, it's not an issue of, necessarily that the historical paradigm of fighting regulation was because you didn't want to do it. What you wanted to do was eliminate uncertainty. And so we've turned it on its head a bit and said, well, certainty, whether it's tough or easy, is a good thing to know. And we like tough because, again, we think we can step up to the plate and deliver. So it provides us with competitive advantage. So we're currently pushing for through our affiliation with US CAP, US Climate Action Partnership, we're pushing for a cap and trade system. This country has not had one. Frankly, we haven't had an energy policy either. So we're pushing for those things, and engaging in the dialogue to make sure that the technical discussion is accurate and can be that the metrics and the system design or the regulation is such that we can get there, that industry can get there and hit it, as opposed to creating, when you think about banning technologies, our perspective is, and certainly those types of regulations are going to come into place, what we would prefer is set an efficiency standard that everyone has to admit. Don't tell business how to get there, but allow us the ability, and of course that's a it's a moot point in some senses, your comment about Australia. But set the efficiency standard high and let the creative talent and the business folks figure out how to get there, whether it's an organic light-emitting diode or a CFL or whatever, or a high-efficiency incandescent, perhaps, a next generation of materials could get there. We've been working on that in our labs. We want a seat at the table to discuss it, but going back to your initial point, I don't think you're ever going to see a dynamic where regulation is going to get any easier. Mm-hmm. So people in business and in the design community really need to step up to the plate and start delivering the designs and delivering the technology to address the issues.
I got to pounce on that one too a little bit. Just while the company's goal is 2012 everything, we immediately took PVC out of all of our best-selling products because we saw that too. Answer, Leap, Think. We saw that coming, and I agree. We see that as a competitive advantage, and that's the opportunity that's afforded the leader, of sustainability in any field right now. You'll probably see them championing it, if not lobbying. And we're a member of the EPA's climate leaders, and we have somebody from Steelcase in the U.S. China board for the environment. And really helping not only with the advancing that thinking. Alan Smith, our head of environmental strategy, was invited by the government in Berlin to come talk about what Steelcase is doing because they were impressed by those activities. And so, I think there is again, things are moving so quickly, and I think everybody's ego's dropping a little bit and just saying who's got the best knowledge right now. And sometimes it's industry, sometimes it's an activist, and sometimes it's government. And I think that the partnerships that have to develop out of that, because the great thing you mentioned too about Gore's Nobel Prize and creating a whole new awareness around this and a sense of urgency can only serve for the better good. And so industry's got to play a big part of that, whether they like it or not. And the ones who like it are going to be the ones who are most successful moving forward.
I would just chime in with government and government regulation is, in our country, consumer driven. And until and as we see, this stuff is happening because constituents are calling up and saying, this is what we want to see. We're concerned about this. This is an issue for us. And as a company, we're all in agreement that it's a competitive advantage for us, for sure. The tighter the controls, the stricter the emissions, the better it is for us because we're already there. And we're looking for the next generation beyond that. And then also for us, we also look at it as a place for activism within our companies. We've done a Vote the Environment campaign every year, in particular around the presidential ones, the last 4, and we'll do it again. And it just it's kind of a call to action, if you will, for our consumers who are our core customers are already highly engaged in that. It's kind of interesting. We get everything from "Don't tell me how to vote, you're a clothing company," to "Thanks for making me think about it."
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, even the person who said "Don't tell me how to vote," we made them think about it, and that was the goal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Another question in the front here.
I have a question that's elaborates more on your question, which is, okay, you've designed the most perfect product, it's recyclable. What controls do you have in place in the company about not overproducing or not just flooding the market with this wonderful organic or environmentally aware product?
May I? The interesting and sort of, I call these unholy unions that happen in business sometimes is the idea of, you've heard of lean manufacturing, right? Toyota pioneered it, great companies are adopting it. Has to do with, basically things are pulled, not pushed, and efficiencies and taking waste and rework out of the system. And so over the last few years, we've completely revamped our industrial system to be according to the principles of lean. The odd thing there is that lean and sustainable practices actually are closer cousins than one would imagine because of this notion of waste and rework and creating supply only when demand calls for it, all the way through the value chain. So only when something is needed in the production process is it brought to that point, rather than just big vats and bins and warehouses full of stuff that's sitting there waiting, and hopefully, somebody will want it down the line. Or eventually it might end up in regrind because no one ever wanted it. So oddly enough, and it's interesting you bring it up, it's just a fact that we kind of put together in a conversation last week. So I'm glad you asked that question. Whereas before I would declare maybe myself the anti-lean in Steelcase because of, in the creative disciplines you want more free space and time to think about things rather than it being about efficiencies. But oddly enough, lean is a great, in a way, friend of sustainability because of that resource use and effectivity of that resource use.
I'll chime in on sort of I think you're talking about the juxtaposition of wanting to grow but also not wanting to have impact. And so we look at that as bring products that have less impact. So when you talk about wind turbines, you talk about which we're back ordered for 5 years on, or maybe even longer. When you talk about our Evolution locomotive engine, the most efficient freight hauling engine out there, back ordered on that. So you talk about switching out products that are in the installed base, but also we look at all sorts of retrofit kits that are sales opportunities and growth opportunities for the company, taking installed base, whether it's in the power generation or in the transportation businesses, pulling stuff out, fixing it, making it more efficient so that the customer who can't necessarily buy a new Evo engine can get their current product up to speed. For us, and then you start to look at the whole life cycle. For us, it is we have to grow. We're as Patagonia and Steelcase are as well. We're a for-profit company, so growth is tantamount. Revenue growth doesn't necessarily mean that you have more stuff out there. It means that you're selling stuff for high margin and is financially successful and does the job better. And uses less in its operation. So, you think about zero emissions or near zero emissions like a wind turbine, that's the kind of future model. We'll sell as many as we can. I'd be completely talking out of another side of my mouth if I said, we're not going to sell as much product as we can. The question is, what is the impact that product going to have throughout its operation and then reclamation at the end of the day?
So do you have the orders in place first and then produce? Or is it...
Well, when you talk about our wind business, when you talk about our aircraft engines business, when you talk about our CFL business, again, those are, and our locomotive business, those are 4 examples where we're kicking ourselves in the head, quite frankly, because we don't have the capacity to meet demand. And so there's a lot of head scratching currently going on, and we're working on looking at improving capacity, but those businesses have grown. They're classic. They're great problems to have, where you design something, you create something that is a total win for the customer and a win environmentally, and then you got to figure out how to build them fast enough. And so, hopefully, that serves as a great example to the rest of the company of, bring this kind of stuff out. We want more and more and more of these things. And your question about I'd like to think we're a great marketing organization as well, but this has taken off faster than we could have anticipated.
Sven, you had mentioned earlier when we spoke about the idea of the dilemma of a small company growing and what that means for your sustainable philosophy.
It's interesting because in forums like this, it's involved with much larger companies, and everybody goes, "Oh, you're Patagonia. You're privately held. You can do whatever you want." It's not true. If anybody ever gets a chance to meet Yvonne, who is the owner of the company, the tool that we have to drive home the idea of environmental and sustainable is to be profitable, and to be profitable above and beyond what somebody who hasn't embraced all the environmental processes that we have. That is our pulpit. That is what gets us noticed. That's what gets Yvonne on the cover of Forbes magazine. It's not because we use organic cotton. It's not because we use recycled polyester. It's the fact that we're an apparel company that's profitable, and our focus is environmentalism.
Yeah. I think there was a hand up at the back there.
Yeah.
We actually have time for just one more question, and I think this gentleman here raised his hand first, so I'm going to let him give the final word here.
Sure. A number of you have mentioned Bill McDonough and cradle-to-cradle certification and materials chemistry and things like that. I'm curious if any of you have worked with the Biomimicry Institute and their Biologist at a Design Table program, or just more generally if getting inspiration from designs of the natural world has influenced any of your work.
Yeah, actually, the Think Chair was inspired by some talk at TED, which is Technology Entertainment Design Conference out on the West Coast in Monterey, when our chief engineer was out there, and I'm sorry I can't remember her name, but she showed a cockroach running on a treadmill. And so I used to say cricket, but it sounded a little bit, more elegant. But it was about the springiness in the joints, and how that amazing performance advantage gives that creature sort of its advantage. And whereas before we created a conventional mechanism to be underneath that chair, we actually flipped it like the next day basically to become, if you look underneath a Think Chair, it's basically two blades of high performance material that flex in a way, position in a way, and so it does inspire things, and also the mentality around that is also about material efficiency, also only when it's needed. So yes, we do work with MIT, we work with people like that, University of Michigan, researchers around the world on things like that. I haven't connected it as much to sustainability, so thank you.
Do we have time for one more question? One short one. There's a hand up there.
Thank you. Hello, thank you. I wanted to address your trade-off in energy, transportation, and manufacturing point. And I wanted to draw an analogy between green markets, local production, locally produced food, and ask you about re-establishing a U.S. manufacturing base for your products.
For all of us?
Well, I'm not sure how much of your products are produced in the U.S., but, in terms of analogous to organic food production, local green markets, is this something that you're considering reintroducing, enhancing?
I can speak to it a little bit. We have our recycled fleece product is pretty much all manufactured here in North America, and it's been one of these ones we just introduced and launched on our web. It's called the Footprint Chronicles, where we look at 4 different products and everything from what it is, what it's supposed to do, what's the good, what's the bad, and what are we doing to address the bad. So that recycled fleece product, pretty much all manufactured here in North America, sewn here in North America. And what we're struggling with is the transportation costs and the emissions associated there. What we're finding that because basically all the shipping in the U.S. is done via truck versus by train or by ocean, the trade-off there sometimes of that, and it speaks directly, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about local food production or you're talking, in this case, an apparel product. And that's where, as we delve deeper into the supply chains and really examine ourselves, those are the kind of questions. And then, how do you address them? Can we ship more of that by train to make it better? And that's what we're working on and examining and trying to go down that road.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you sort of, the analogy of grow it locally, consume it locally. And the impact of on sort of the life cycle when you look at the transportation and movement. We have operations in 100 different countries globally. 50%, I think we're just cresting the barrier of more than 50% of our revenues are derived outside the United States and or more appropriately outside of North America. There are cases where we manufacture aircraft engines in Cincinnati, and that's a center of excellence, and we'll continue to do that. But when you look at our locomotive business, for instance, we set up facilities in China to source to the Chinese market, not to bring back to the U.S. We actually are a exporter currently of locomotives globally. So But we will, just as we need to have operations in country for country, and we've just realized that, no surprise, having Chinese nationals in GE calling the shots in China makes sense. They know the market, they understand the players, or in Europe, or in Latin America, or the Middle East, or wherever. I think for us, the same paradigm exists for manufacturing after we get to a certain critical mass. You can imagine how much some of the equipment we make weighs. Shipping it is expensive and consumes quite a bit of fuel. But it's an issue of growing the market first, and then setting up operations there secondarily. But it's sort of tangentially, it's interesting for us. Our company, we don't have subsidiaries. Every GE employee from a human resources perspective, is in the same salary bands and performance bands, et cetera. So we really have shifted from this US-centric company to a global company where people move around. And it doesn't matter whether you're in China, if you're a certain band, you're the same as in the US. And I only draw that connectivity to the discussion here in that it really creates this idea of moving around and functioning in different geographies and having operations that really work in different geographies, and the ability to move people seamlessly through to those geographies. And really, at the end of the day, it gets back to this issue of efficiencies and knowledge base in working to address a local need with local talent, with local production, if it has that critical mass.
I can only echo that. I know we're pressed for time. So the real quick answer is Americans have to get used to the idea that the biggest growth may not be in North America moving forward, and that often these plants that are set up in Morocco or Kuala Lumpur or California aren't to ship product from Shenzhen to New York. They're often to ship from Shenzhen to Shenzhen, and that the biggest market growth we've seen has been outside of the U.S. And so we've always been in Germany and in France and in Morocco and in Kuala Lumpur to serve those markets. Of course, a certain component of our product is made elsewhere, but that's why we have plants in Canada, because we ship to Toronto and Quebec. So it's often not quite as simple as that, but without a doubt, figuring those fuel costs and impact is part of the LCA model.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting last point to finish on, and particularly with Sven's comment. This is a very, very difficult area with all kinds of trade-offs that I think we're only just really beginning to evaluate and work out. Transportation is an environmental cost, but it's sometimes offset against other things. So I think we're at the beginning of a journey in a way. So I'd just like to thank all three panelists for being here today. It's been a great discussion. Lots of room for discussion in the future, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.